I know what he's talking about.
We have to, it's
They have 28, we have 6.
What do you want, Pickaroo? No. Did you hear what I said to you? Did you hear what I said? I said, I'll kill you if you talk to me later.
Can't see the screen, but.
Like my paralegal here. I know them very well. Were you there after that conference? Oh, okay. It's unbelievable to me when you hear him talk. He sounds exactly like his father. It's unbelievable. I'm sure. Yeah. I've only met Matt a few times, but I instantly took a liking to him. You know, and Jay was kind of a mentor of mine when I was in law school. Yeah. So he coached Newport there and mock trial. Yeah, Janice, I don't know her as well, but I mean, two fantastic attorneys. I was. Anyway, just one thing to go with me. Did you work with him when he was at that time? And he just took the way. She is in that firm. I haven't tried the case in front of himself now. Yeah, he's a good guy.
What goes off after one. Yeah. That's
Hey, Jim, I thought you gave ours my Oh, you did not! You didn't hold the room. Sorry. This is for tonight. We'll work after this. So, if you need to
Unmute.
The host would like you to unmute your microphone. You can press star. You are unmuted.
Did you do it?
All rise, everyone, please. All persons having any business before the Honorable Beverly County, Justice of the Norfolk Superior Court, in the Florida County of Norfolk. If you are native to your attendance, you shall be heard. God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. This court is now open. You may be seated.
Judge, this is 22117, the Commonwealth versus Karen Reed. Can I have counsel identify themselves for the record, starting with the Commonwealth?
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Good morning, Your Honor. Hank Brennan for the Commonwealth. Along with me is Attorney Adam Lally and Attorney Laura McLaughlin.
Good morning, Mr. Brennan. Good morning, Mr. Lally. Good morning, Ms. McLaughlin.
Good morning, Your Honor. Alan Jackson on behalf of Ms. Reed.
Good morning, Mr. Jackson.
Good morning, Your Honor. Elizabeth Little, also on behalf of Ms. Reed.
Good morning, Ms. Little.
Good morning, Your Honor. David Unetti for Karen Reed.
Good morning, Mr. Unetti.
Good morning, Your Honor. Robert Alessi for Ms. Reed.
Good morning, Mr. Alessi. Good morning, Ms. Reed. All right, so for today, we have our Daubert hearing. I asked through Mr. Clerk the parties to have a proposed scheduling order for me. Were you able to do that?
We've begun the discussions of it. I think we could have it shortly, Your Honor. I have some proposals by the defense. I just want a few moments to reflect on it.
Okay. All right, so during a recess or something, I'd like you to at least give me something so that we can discuss it today. There are some discovery motions and then just some housekeeping matters. So I would like to get started right away. Is Dr. Russell here?
Yes, she is, Your Honor.
Okay, oh, good morning, Doctor. Would you come on up to the witness stand, please? Thank you very much. I do. Good morning, Dr. Russell.
Good morning.
Okay, the defense is calling Dr. Russell as a witness. Jim, can I have the exhibits? Will counsel need the exhibits for examination of this witness, or can I have them with me and look at them?
Your Honor, whatever your preference is, we will abide by that. We may want to publish some at
Sure,
appropriate time.
that's no problem, but I can keep the notebook, that's not a problem?
Oh, yeah, that's intended for your use, Your Honor.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, go right ahead, counsel.
Your Honor, if I may, a couple of matters before Dr. Russell testified, with Your Honor's permission.
Okay,
One will take 15 seconds and the other will take maybe 3 minutes.
okay, is it something that Dr. Russell can remain in the courtroom for?
It is.
Okay,
And
Sure.
if at any point I'm incorrect in that assumption, I'm sure you will tell me.
okay,
First of all, the first order is I want to thank the court for granting my permission to practice before the court.
okay,
And I'll strive to comport myself to honor the opportunity I've been given.
thank you.
Secondly, with regard to the decision that Your Honor rendered with regard to our opposition to the motion, the reason I just wanted to raise that briefly is I wanted to make sure that I properly discharge my role in terms of a record. It won't be a long soliloquy, but I just wanted to point out to Your Honor the basis for why I am having this colloquy with the court.
Okay, is it in addition to what you have in your writings?
It is.
Or is it, okay, so that I'll let you talk about, but,
Yeah, I'm not going to go into the substance of the writings.
Okay.
I understand Your Honor has decided in that regard.
okay,
So, and thank you, Your Honor. The first point is rooted in the Commonwealth versus Downs case, which is 31 Mass App Court 467, 1991. And the short of it for that case, which is toward the end of the case, which it was a matter very similar procedurally to this, where there was a request for reconsideration. The court took on that question of reconsideration. And what happened was the appellate court stated that it would be important, and I'm trying to discharge my duty as an officer of the court, but also for an advocate, to put on the record, right, the decision with the basis for the decision with regard to it.
Sure, I know, I have no problem with you doing this. You don't need to apologize for making a record. I have no problem with that.
Thank you. So I'll get right to it. So my request is, in accordance with Downs, that there be placed on the record some explanation for the decision. I would appreciate that. And then secondly, the second and last part of it is our expectation coming into the hearing is based on Commonwealth versus Addy, which is 79 Mass Appellate Court 835, 2011. And the short of that case, Your Honor, is it was a Daubert-Lanigan motion, very, very much similar to the procedural posture of this motion, where the court set a Daubert-Lanigan hearing. The party who was in support of the expert testimony then was given the opportunity to oppose the motion, and this is what the court said. The court stated that in response to the motion, the Commonwealth, and it was opposite because the Commonwealth was supporting the testimony, says in response to the motion, the Commonwealth submitted Trooper Sanford's collision reconstruction report. Then I'm going to skip down to the nub of it. At the motion hearing, after reading Trooper Sanford's report and listening to the arguments of counsel, the judge decided not to hold an evidentiary hearing and ruled that Trooper Sanford's opinion was admissible at trial because there was a factual basis for his opinion and it was therefore reliable. The reason I bring that up, Your Honor, is just to state what my expectation was and why I went in the manner that I did. And of course, Mr. McDermott was gracious enough to send an email that said, hey, if you want to change what the court expects the hearing to be, you need an affidavit and you need a motion, and that's what I did. So in conclusion, Your Honor, it is the position of the defense that the papers that we submitted, and I won't get into the argument, would obviate the need for an evidentiary hearing, much in the way that the Addy case obviated, where the party was given an opportunity to make the arguments in terms of the motion. So my main point in raising these two in conclusion is I would appreciate if Your Honor could state a basis for the denial of the what I will call the Addy process, and we will of course respect Your Honor's decision and proceed in the manner Your Honor directs.
Okay. What do you say? Who's going to argue this for the Commonwealth?
Hank Brennan for the Commonwealth. Your Honor, I believe you have the discretion to make the decision that a Lanigan hearing is appropriate. I didn't have the benefit, but Your Honor certainly had the benefit of a voir dire prior to trial. Your Honor had the benefit of watching the trial testimony. Your Honor had the benefit of appreciating that it wasn't Rule 14 that was complied with prior to that hearing. In fact, a report was provided merely 2 days ago on December 10th. And that report, if the court has an opportunity to see it, is in conflict in many ways from the testimony at the voir dire, and it's in conflict with testimony at trial. One thing that is constant from the voir dire through the report that we received 2 days ago is that there is an absence of methodology. There is no basis in methodology to support the opinions that have been provided by this witness. And that fundamentally supports a decision that the defense should meet their burden to be compelled to provide a witness so that they can see if they can satisfy the Lanigan-Daubert standard. Thank you.
Okay.
Your Honor, he delved into the substance. I don't plan on belaboring it, but if I could just be heard.
Sure.
Thank you. Appreciate it. The methodology, and if we're going to go to the testimony, you will, of course, everyone will hear it firsthand, was established the first time. It's pattern recognition. It's well established in the law. And that was what Dr. Russell testified first trial. That's in her report. And as we're to proceed, that's what will happen. That's first. Your Honor, it was a rule, the trigger for the last time was a Rule 14, but Your Honor, in the June 20th transcript, on pages 59 and 62, said, on 59, Your Honor said, you, the Commonwealth, raised Daubert-type concerns. And on page 62, Your Honor said, I have to exercise my role as gatekeeper. So it was clear that it was Daubert. The methodology was established. So I just wanted to respond in that manner for clarity of the record.
Okay. Additionally, after I made the finding that I made, I heard trial testimony. So based on everything, in my discretion, we're having a hearing.
Understood,
Okay.
Your Honor.
There are your findings.
Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Okay. All right. So you all set to go?
I am all set to go, Your
All right.
Honor.
Go right ahead, Mr. Lessie.
Thank you. Good morning, Dr. Russell.
Good morning.
And you'll keep your voice up. That would be helpful to all. Please state your name, your full name, and spell your last name.
Yes. Marie Russell, Russell.
Now, at a high level, what is your professional background?
I'm an emergency physician.
And is your professional, do you have anything else in terms of your professional background in addition to being an emergency room physician?
Yes, I'm also a trained forensic pathologist.
Your Honor, may I interrupt for 1 second? I'm sorry.
Sure.
Can I have a moment to run with counsel? Thank you.
Thank you for that, Your Honor.
Go right ahead.
How long have you been an emergency room physician?
I've been an emergency department physician since 1987, so that is over 30 years.
How long have you been a forensic pathologist?
I've been a forensic pathologist for about 31 years.
So you've been an emergency room physician and a fellowship trained forensic pathologist, both of those for 30 plus years.
Correct.
Do you have a medical license?
Yes.
When were you first licensed to practice medicine?
In 1988 in California.
And what licenses do you currently hold?
I hold medical licenses in California, New York, Idaho, Massachusetts.
And in California, what are you technically licensed? What is the documentation of the license you had? Your license as a what?
Physician and surgeon in California.
A physician and surgeon, did you say?
Correct.
Your Honor, as I'm sure you know, but I want to make sure I get your protocol correctly. We've pre-marked, Mr. Brennan and I have agreed to the exhibits. We've agreed to both the pre-marking and to the admissibility of each exhibit. And I can never either tell you how I understand I'm to go or Your Honor can state it.
So these are in evidence?
Yes.
So use them as if they're in evidence?
Thank you. Appreciate that. May I approach the
Yes.
witness? Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Russell, I have handed you, which is in evidence as Exhibit 1. Do you recognize Exhibit 1?
Yes, I do,
How do you recognize it?
because I wrote it.
And what is Exhibit 1?
This is my curriculum vitae.
And is that your updated curriculum vitae?
Yes, it is.
It's the most recent one.
Yes.
I now want to get into your educational background with a little bit of sprinkling of experience going into it. Where did you go to college?
I went to college at MIT and Northeastern University.
Approximately when did you attend Massachusetts Institution of Technology?
From 1972 to 1974.
And what did you study at MIT?
I took pre-med courses.
Did you obtain a degree from MIT?
No,
Why not?
because my mother got sick. She developed cancer, and I went back to New York.
And after that experience, did you go back to college?
Yes,
Where did you go?
Northeastern University.
And what years did you attend Northeastern University?
Part-time from 1974 to 1981.
And did you obtain a degree from Northeastern University?
Yes,
And what degree was that?
that was a Bachelor of Science degree with highest honors.
After college, did you go on to receive a Doctor of Medicine?
Yes,
Where?
at the University of Massachusetts in Worcester,
When?
1987.
Now let's go into residencies, internships, and fellowships. Did you complete any residencies?
Yes,
What residencies did you complete?
I completed a residency in emergency medicine, followed by a residency in anatomic pathology.
What is anatomic pathology?
Anatomic pathology is the study. It's a division of pathology. It's a subset of pathology, and it's a division that deals with diseases that can be diagnosed by looking at tissues and bodily fluids.
And what is emergency medicine? Although most all of us have that experience, if you just briefly describe what emergency medicine is.
Well, emergency medicine is the field of medicine that deals with acute injuries and injuries of people.
In terms of the residencies, briefly describe what was involved. What did you do in those residencies? And let's start out with emergency medicine.
Emergency medicine was a very intense residency. It was a combined internship and residency that lasted for 4 years, and I was at one of the busiest trauma centers in the United States. We would routinely see patients in the emergency room, and some months we rotated outside the emergency room to various subspecialty clinics and areas like the ICU, for instance. In the emergency medicine department, we worked all different shifts. We saw numerous patients because it was a very busy facility, and we saw anything that ranged from gunshot wounds, stab wounds, beatings, down to runny noses.
And where was specifically those residencies? What facility? What is the name of it?
It was at the Los Angeles County USC Medical Center, which people formerly knew as the General Hospital, the 19-story General Hospital from Los Angeles.
And did that have a certain level designation with regard to the type of trauma that would come to those facilities?
Yes, it's a level 1 trauma center, which is the highest level that can be achieved.
And in terms of the residencies, in terms of anatomic pathology, where was that residency? Which facility?
That was at the same facility.
And how many years was the residency of anatomic pathology?
That was 2 years.
And how many years for emergency medicine?
Combined with the internship, it was 4 years.
Did you complete any fellowships?
Yes.
What fellowships?
I completed a fellowship in forensic pathology.
What is a fellowship compared to, say, an internship and a residency?
Generally, it's a higher level. A fellowship is completed or done, undertaken after someone completes a residency.
What did you do in your fellowship?
Oh, in forensic pathology?
Yes.
Oh, did autopsies. So it was a very organized training program, which included 1 to 2 autopsies a day, mostly 2, and as well as lectures, seminars, interesting case conferences, many things. During that time, I was sent to the FBI for a specific case series. So it was very intense. And in terms of the autopsies, I autopsied cases that were gunshot wounds, stab wounds, many homicides, many homicides, accident victims, car accidents, people hit by cars, people stabbed, child abuse, a wide range. And the goal was to give the fellows the widest range of experiences.
And can you estimate how many autopsies you performed during your fellowship?
Oh, I know for a fact that I performed over 500.
And that was over a 2-year period?
Correct.
So you're performing then an autopsy almost every other day, is that
Oh, no,
correct?
1 to 2 autopsies a day.
1 to 2 a day.
Yes.
And what at its core are you doing in terms of an autopsy as a forensic pathologist?
You know, the autopsy is just part of what the forensic pathologist does, which is death investigation. So a forensic pathologist looks at a person's, well, just the body is one part of it. The external exam, sometimes, some cases, not all cases, get an autopsy actually that go to the medical examiner's office. But there's a death investigation which involves a detailed external examination, plus an examination of the circumstances of how the decedent was found, interviews with police officers and others when appropriate, interviews with their doctors, and examination photos if available.
Earlier in your testimony, you said you have over 30 years of experience as a forensic pathologist. When was the last time you engaged in the practice of medicine pertaining to forensic pathology?
This year.
And have you had a continuous or non-continuous practice in forensic pathology?
Continuous.
And we're going to get to that later on as appropriate. Not as appropriate, we're going to get to it later on. Do you have any affiliations with professional organizations?
Yes.
Can you name them?
Yes, I am a fellow of the American Academy of Forensic Science.
What do you need to do to become a fellow of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences?
Well, you have to be a member for a certain number of years, a minimum number of years, and attend a certain number of their annual meetings. And it helps if you've given presentations at the annual meetings.
What other professional organizations are you a member of?
I'm also a member of the National Association of Medical Examiners.
Are you a member or a fellow?
I'm actually a fellow.
What do you need to do to be a fellow of the National Association of Medical Examiners?
It's very similar. Be a member for a certain number of years, and they usually ask that you've given at least one presentation.
What other professional organizations are you a member of?
Okay, so I've been a former member of the American Academy of Emergency Physicians, a former fellow, actually. I'm a member of the California Homicide Investigators Association and the California Sexual Assault Investigators Association.
Now let's move to trainings. Do you have any specialized trainings?
Lots of specialized training.
Please name them.
Okay. Well, I have specialized training in both emergency medicine-related fields and forensic pathology-related fields. Would you like me to name both?
Well, maybe eventually, but I'm going to try to shorten this a little bit. Give me an example of the type of investigations apropos to why we're here today, that you would have had specialized trainings for?
Well, I attended a 2-week program in crime scene investigation. I've attended and completed programs in forensic photography, bomb investigation, hit and run accident investigation as well.
Yeah. Dr. Russell, if you need to access your report, do it, but I would prefer that unless you need to, we just have a question and answer. You don't
So I can't see whether Dr. Russell's reading from
I'm sorry, you
her.
can't.
I can't
no.
see. Do you have your CV in front of you?
I do.
All right, so what's typical, counsel, is it will remain closed. If she needs to refer to it, you just ask, and of course I'll let her
That's what
refer.
I understood, yes.
So is that, you have it open in front of you?
It's right here.
Okay, so counsel, why don't you?
I will.
Why don't you leave it there turned over, Dr. Russell?
Oh, okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Your
I
Honor.
can't see from up here whether she was reading or not.
I had that sense, that's why I mentioned it.
I
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Do you have any specialized training beyond your experience as emergency room physician or forensic pathology in motor vehicle accident investigation?
Yes.
Describe that, please.
Yes, I took a several-day course here in Massachusetts on hit and run accident investigation.
And we're going to get into this a little bit more, but did you also have experience with motor vehicle accident diagnosis and treatment of humans in the emergency room?
Oh, yes, yes.
We'll get into more of that detail. As a forensic pathologist for 30 plus years, did you see decedents and living patients who had been the subject of motor vehicle accidents?
Many.
And in terms of forensic pathology, are patients always deceased, or does the field of forensic pathology also address living persons?
Yes, the field of forensic pathology as a broad field, yes, can deal with living people. Some offices, some government offices will choose to restrict their involvement to deceased people only. But it's a broad field, it does involve living people too.
Now let's move to expert witness experience in courtrooms. You understand what I mean by the terminology expert witness?
Yes.
What jurisdictions have you testified in as an expert witness?
Well, California, Florida, Illinois, Arizona, and the state of Washington.
What topics in that expert testimony did you testify to?
Both emergency medicine and forensic pathology.
So you testified as an expert witness in those cases in both emergency medicine and forensic pathology?
Correct.
And you were qualified as an expert in each one of those categories, correct?
Yes.
Was your opinion ever excluded, your expert witness opinion ever excluded in any of those court cases?
Never.
Let's now move to work experience. What do you currently do for work?
Well, right now, I am reviewing cases, reviewing medical legal cases. I attend conferences, and I've kept up my board certification status. It's a lot of work to keep up your board certification status.
Understood. In terms of other work, do you do work for any boards in any state?
Yes, the Medical Board of Massachusetts.
And what type of...
Excuse me, Medical Board of California.
Right. And what is your title with respect to the Medical Board of California?
Medical consultant.
And describe specifically, you don't have to go into detail, but just describe what it is, the types of things you do, for the medical board, and I assume that's in furtherance of practicing medicine. Is that consultancy the practice of medicine in California?
Oh, absolutely. You can't be a medical consultant for the medical board without a medical license. It is the practice of medicine.
Give us some examples of what your practice of medicine is with respect to the Medical Board of California.
For the medical board, I review cases. So the cases are referred to the medical board because of concerns that a physician, a licensed physician in the state of California, is either practicing outside the law or practicing below the standard of care, or a combination of those things. So the cases are referred to the medical board, and I am one of the people that reviews the cases and makes recommendations as to whether there is actually a concern.
So, going back to my clinical pharmacy days, I believe I understand the standard of care parlance, but we have maybe some different parlance in the medical field. Is standard of care and whether physicians met it also known as physician negligence?
Yes, if they don't meet the standard of care, it's
Yes.
considered physician negligence, yes.
Describe your role in cases briefly of your expert witness, the topics in forensic medical investigations.
The topics actually range from homicide. I've been involved with several homicide cases. Homicide, often stab wounds, blunt force trauma, child abuse are the topics. And domestic violence is also another frequent topic.
Prior to your current role that you've just described as an expert witness and a medical consultant for the Medical Board of California, I want to go back just a little bit to the expert witness. Are you able to state whether you have testified previously mostly for prosecution or defense? Do you have a sense as to where the majority of your testimony has been on whose behalf?
Well, it's been mixed. There's been a lot of prosecution cases.
So you've testified as an expert witness many times in support of the prosecution.
Yes.
And has your testimony in support of the prosecution been only as a physician, or was there times when you, before you became a physician, that you were testifying on behalf of the prosecution, say when you were a police officer?
Yes.
And roughly, how many cases, we're going to get more into your police officer experience, but how many roughly cases do you recall testifying on behalf of the prosecution as a police officer?
25 to 30.
Now let's go to just prior to your immediate role. Before being a medical consultant for the Medical Board of California, where did you work?
Immediately before I worked at the state of California prison system. It's called the Corrections Department in the state of California, and I was the chief medical executive for one of the major prisons.
What years approximately did you serve in that role as chief medical executive of the California State Prison at Corcoran?
Yes, from 2018 to 2018 to 2023.
What was your role? What did you do?
Oh, well, the chief medical executive is in charge of the whole medical department, and so in that role, I had a lot of duties, including supervising the medical care of all of the patients, the inmates, conducting various committees. I chaired many committees, process improvement, pharmacy therapeutics, death committee. I investigated every single death that occurred at the prison during that time period.
Let's stop there if we could, please.
Yes.
And talk about from 2018 to 2020 is what I heard you say was your time period. Describe what was a death review at Corcoran
Well,
that you performed.
yes. The death review at Corcoran was quite extensive. And so what would happen, well, first of all, let me give you background. Background is that the patients die from a variety of causes in prison system, including suicide, homicide, natural death, overdoses, a wide variety of reasons people die. So my job was to investigate those deaths. And the way I did that was when these inmates or patients were taken to the emergency area, when they were found unresponsive, taken to the emergency area, if I was there, in the building, that's where my office was, I would go and personally examine these patients from head to toe.
In that personal examination from head to toe, did you ever experience any patients with wounds?
Yes.
Describe some of the wounds that you experienced that were the subject of your death review.
Well, there were a variety of wounds, and some of the most common ones were stab wounds, or blunt force trauma wounds, contusions, or commonly known as bruises. But if it was, for instance, a hanging patient, I would look at the wounds around the neck to see if the ligature mark was horizontal or had a vertical component, because that could differentiate the manner of death or the mode of death.
You have to ever in this process have to determine whether a wound was, well, let me back up. Are you familiar with the term defensive wound?
Yes.
What does that term mean in the field of medicine?
Well, typically, what that means is that the victim of an assault attempted to defend themselves during the assault. And one of the common ways they do that is they bring up their arms to protect their face, neck, chest area, head area from the assault. So defensive wounds are commonly seen in the arm, the forearm, the posterior portion of the forearm, or the hands also.
Did you ever have to determine whether a wound was defensive when either the patient was unresponsive or the patient was deceased?
Many times.
Is it many times for both, or is it many times for one of those two?
Well, definitely when the patient was deceased.
So let's stop there. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Let's start. So many times, do you have an approximate number of how many times just at your 5 years at Corcoran you determined whether a wound was a defensive wound on a deceased patient, approximately?
Not very many.
Okay.
Counsel, could we get an answer as to how many death reviews total were done while she
Yes, Your Honor. I will ask that question right now. How many death reviews did you perform? And if you want to do it based upon per year, average month, whatever gives the court the best, most accurate answer.
Okay. Well, on average, we had one death per month. So some of those occurred at nighttime. But I reviewed all the cases, but he didn't personally examine every single case.
Right.
Over 35 got a very intensive exam.
So if I did my math correctly, it's 60, right? It's 12 times 5. You were there 5 years?
For death reviews.
For death
yes.
reviews, and that was the court's question.
Yes.
Right. Was there anybody else at Corcoran doing death reviews?
There was a committee that I formed to review deaths. It didn't exist when I first got there, but it did get formed later on.
Were there any other physicians on the committee that, so you
excuse
were
me.
the only physician on the committee in Corcoran that was performing the death reviews, or not?
No, I misspoke. There was one other physician, the person who was my assistant, who also needed to be involved in those death reviews in case I wasn't around.
Did you ever need to consult with any medical examiner's office in connection with your death reviews at Corcoran?
I frequently consulted with the local Kings County Medical Examiner's Office.
Describe examples of that consultation and interaction.
Okay, so I would conduct my initial part of the review, and I would call, on some cases, not every single case, but on some cases, call the Kings County Medical Examiner's Office and speak to them to alert them to certain findings or certain things that I wanted them to specifically look for in their examination.
Did that consultation include any consultation regarding wounds and the source and nature of the wounds?
I don't recall.
Now let's go to your emergency medicine physician experience at LAC plus USC. Do you have a shorthand that you'd like to use so I don't have to say that every time?
I don't.
All right. So I'll just say LAUSC. Would that be something that would work?
I say LAC-USC.
I'll say LAC-USC also. So what years were you an emergency medicine physician at LAC-USC?
I was there as an emergency intern, resident, and physician from 1987 to 2016.
So if, again, I did my math right, it's about 29 years?
Yes.
And you've described previously that that facility was a level 1 trauma center, correct?
Yes, it was.
What is a level 1 trauma center?
A level 1 trauma center is the highest level that the trauma center could be. So it means it has in-house neurosurgeon, in-house orthopedic surgeon, an active research program, and obviously in-house trauma surgeons.
What did you do as an emergency medicine physician at that facility from 1987 to 2016? I'm sure it's a lot, but if you could give some representative examples.
Well, we staffed both the major and minor areas of the emergency department where the patients were brought into. So any patient that was brought in with major trauma or, even non-trauma, medical condition, heart attack or stroke, would be brought into the emergency department, and we would provide the initial examination, screening, resuscitation, whatever was needed. And then if the patient needed to go to the operating room, we would call the surgeons, and if they needed to go to the ICU, we would stabilize them and send them to the ICU.
In addition to diagnosing and treating that we've all experienced with the unfortunate, with all respect, having to go to the emergency medicine department, did you engage in any surgery in the emergency medicine department? And if you could describe what you mean if the answer is yes.
Yes.
Describe what it is that you did that constituted surgery at the emergency medicine department from 1987 to 2016. We're going to get into more specifics apropos to the issue at case here, but just looking for what, when we say that you did surgery, want to give an idea of what that is.
Okay, so we did what is considered minor surgery. We sewed up, we debrided and sewed up lacerations, repaired lacerations. We incised certain infected wounds and cut them open. So is that what you mean?
Yes, thank you. So now moving, and we're going to come back to some of that, but now moving on to the next position that you had at the LAC-USC Jail Medical Services. Can you describe what the name of that position was?
Yes, I was jail medical director.
And approximately what time period were you jail medical director at LAC-USC?
Okay, before I answer that, I'd like to say that in addition, so we generally had a clinical role and an administrative role. So there were several things going on at the same time. In terms of jail medical director, as the administrative role, I was doing that from 2003 to 2014.
And can you describe the in-custody unit that was there that you provided this role that you just described?
Yes, we had an unusual situation where we had, in addition to the regular major emergency department, we also had a specially dedicated emergency, combination of emergency, inpatient, and outpatient area for patients that were incarcerated. So the patients would be brought directly up to the jail emergency department for their injuries if they were hemodynamically stable. What I mean by that is if their blood pressure and pulse were stable, they'd be brought directly up to the emergency department.
And what type of agencies would bring those types of patients to that department?
The Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, Los Angeles Police Department, the California Highway Patrol, local area, any of the local police departments in LA County were eligible to bring their patients there.
And briefly describe the volume of patients that would be brought into that department.
It was very busy. Just the emergency department alone was 20 to 30 patients a day, just for the jail emergency department. And then the inpatient area depended on the year, because it was about 40 patients, inpatients, and over the years that decreased a little bit.
Did you ever have a role with regard to emergency medicine quality improvement at LAC-USC?
Yes, I was chairman of the committee for a period of time.
And do you remember approximately when that was?
I'd have to refer to the CV, sorry.
Would around 2000 to 2003 be approximately an accurate time?
Yes.
What did you do as the Director of Emergency Medicine Quality Improvement?
So for that role, I was in charge of quality improvement projects and how they were progressing during the interim, as well as I investigated all the deaths in the main emergency department and the jail emergency department.
Now, the title has in it quality improvement.
Yes.
Am I correct that in order to be a director of quality improvement, you have to understand well the underlying practice to understand what needs to be improved?
Yes.
And did you believe that you had that high level of understanding?
Yes.
And did you exercise that high level of understanding in that role?
Yes.
Now, before that, did you have any experience with life support training at LAC-USC?
Yes, I was the director of the Life Support Training Center.
And was that also around late 1990s, 2000 time period?
Yes.
And what was your role? What did you do as director of Center for Life Support and Training at LAC-USC?
So we provided all of the life support courses that were taught at the institution, including advanced cardiac life support, advanced trauma life support, which was taught to the surgeons and emergency physicians, and pediatric life support.
Now we're going to switch gears a little bit. Have you ever been an adjunct professor?
Yes.
When and where?
From, I believe the dates were 1998 to 2003 at the California State University at Los Angeles.
And what did you teach at Cal State Los Angeles?
I taught a graduate level course called Legal Medicine, which was part of their master's degree program.
And that's a graduate program, correct?
Yes.
And What were the students in the grad program there for? Was there a certain title that they were referred to as?
Yes, it was a graduate program in criminalistics, and so many of them were crime lab employees or headed to work at a crime lab.
And just briefly, can you give just examples of some of the topics you taught to those that were in this criminalistics program?
Yes, so I was teaching the medical course, and so I had to teach a wide range of topics about forensic medicine to these people who would be going to crime scenes and seeing deceased bodies, etc. So my topics included things like time of death, blunt force trauma, sharp force trauma, burns, wounds. I did teach about wounds and including, so a wide variety of wounds.
Let's focus in on wounds. Okay. Describe in some detail the type of wound analysis and treatment you taught as an adjunct professor at Cal State Los Angeles.
Well, there was no treatment taught to those students, as opposed to the emergency students, emergency medicine doctors. But the types of wounds that I talked about in the legal medicine course included, again, sharp force, blunt force, thermal. I talked about bite wounds in terms of identifying bite wounds on a deceased body. I talked about wounds that people would see in child abuse, domestic violence, elder abuse.
And in your teaching, let's break that down. In your teaching of dog, is it fair to say dog-inflicted human wounds? Is that a fair term? Or would
Well,
you, or would you use?
Mostly bite wounds in general.
Bite wounds, and was that bite wounds from a specific animal or general animals?
No, mostly human. I talked about mostly human bite wounds.
Okay.
With a reference to animal wounds.
And what was the reference to animal wounds?
Just how they can be differentiated from human bite wounds.
So you taught human bite wounds, but you also taught how to differentiate human bite wounds from dog bite wounds on humans.
Yes.
I move to strike that.
So let the witness answer that. So ask it in a non-leading way, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. Describe what you taught the students on the topic of human wounds and dog bite wounds.
Okay. I taught the students to recognize human bite wounds. So I had pictures, images, and slides on human bite wounds, why they would be important, the forensic value of bite wounds. I mentioned how they may differ from other bite wounds, such as dog bite wounds. In the emergency department, the focus was a little different.
That's what I wanted to go to next. So describe, well, first, in your many years in the emergency department, and we're going to get to this in more detail. So why don't we just save it until the next category we get to? We'll come back to that. Before you were an adjunct professor at Cal State Los Angeles, and before you were a medical doctor, what did you do for work?
I was a police officer full-time.
And approximately when were you a full-time police officer?
From 1977 to 1984 in Massachusetts.
When you started on the police force in Malden, how many women were on the police force?
Before I started, none.
So you were the first woman on the police force in Malden.
Correct.
Before, did you go to academy?
Yes.
Did you graduate successfully from academy?
From the Boston Police Academy, yes.
Before that, did you have any other work experience?
Yes, I worked in an emergency room, actually.
Right, but in terms of from the time period, as I understand it, in Malden, you, if I heard correctly, you said approximately 1997 to 1984 for?
77.
I'm sorry, 77, right. So is it, before that, did you have any other job in the community in Malden?
Well, in the period 1974 to 1977, during that period of time, I worked in the emergency department. I was an EMT and I was an auxiliary police officer.
Let's talk about the EMT experience. What did you do as an EMT?
I did volunteer work in an ambulance.
And just, again, most of us know what an EMT does, but just for the record, just briefly, what did you do as an EMT?
Generally rendered first aid to calls for emergency service.
Now let's go into the category of your medical training and experience specifically pointed at a certain topic. With regard to wounds, do you have any experience with dog-inflicted wounds on humans?
Much experience.
Let's start and do this chronologically. What professional experience have you had with, we'll call them dog bites? What would you like to call them, dog bites or dog bite wounds? What's your preference?
Dog bite wounds.
So what's your professional experience going chronologically with dog bite wounds? Your first.
Well, my first experience that I recall was during that period of 1975 to 1977, when I attended a training session where I witnessed the training of guard dogs. The training was conducted by some people I know, and I was invited to this professional session. And during that session, even though the simulated criminals were wearing specially designed sleeves on their arms, one of the participants was accidentally bitten by one of the dogs.
And when you say accidentally bitten, what do you mean accidentally? Did the dog have a full bite grip or less than a full bite grip?
You know, I can't really say because I don't remember if I actually saw that bite, but the dogs were being taught how to aggressively bite and hold on to the simulated criminals. And apparently this one bite went out of, you know, the range of where the sleeve ended.
And this was back in the 1970s?
Mid-70s, yes.
Did you provide any care for the wound of the person that was subjected to that dog injury?
Yes, I was an EMT, so I provided basic first aid and transported that person to local emergency room.
So you provided treatment on the spot, and then you participated in the transport to the ER?
Yes.
And did you get an opportunity at that point to observe the wound that was caused by this dog bite?
Very closely.
And because you treated it, correct?
Correct.
Let's now move to the LACUSC Jail Emergency Department. And I recall you testify that was approximately 1987 to 1995. Do I have that right?
That was part, yeah, that was the intense part that where we saw a lot of, law enforcement dog bites.
What, did you see any dog bite wounds in that jail emergency department?
Many.
When you say many, can you give, not how much you treated, but just how many of those dog-induced wounds that you observed?
I would say about 60 to 70 cases that I personally observed. There could have been a lot more.
Now, what type of dogs, well, let me strike that. As part of that treatment, did you learn what type of dog inflicted the wound?
Well, these were trained law enforcement dogs.
So these were canine dogs, right?
Yes.
And is canine bites an appropriate term to describe them?
Yes.
And how many of these individuals at LAUSC Jail Emergency Department did you personally treat with these canine-induced dog wounds?
Personally, about 40.
And you're saying personally, did you have any other experience in addition to those 40 that was not personal treatment with dog wounds?
Yes, so we worked.
Describe what those additional roles were.
We worked as a team, and so sometimes one intern or one resident would get the case, and another time the other person on the team would get the case. So, but we worked as a team. We saw all the wounds together as a team, and so that's why it's hard to give it a hard number.
What was your role as a member of that team when you were not personally treating the wound? What was your role? What did you do?
I would assist. I would see other patients, but we all rounded on all the cases.
What do you mean by rounding?
Rounding is this medical phenomenon where the team of doctors and sometimes other healthcare professionals go from bed to bed and discuss each case.
So you went, in addition to the 40, you went as a member of the team from bed to bed to bed, and in addition to those 40 of dog-inflicted wounds, you saw additional dog-inflicted wounds, correct?
Yes.
Describe the level of bites that you would observe both as personally treating and as a member of the team.
Well, these bites were unlike anything I'd seen before. They were very extensive dog bites with a lot of tissue damage. And there were areas on the patients where the dog would attempt more than one bite. And sometimes there were, completed bites, and sometimes there were what I called partial bites, where there were just some scratches, abrasions, superficial wounds. But so it was quite a different thing than I had read about in textbooks.
What do you mean by partial bites?
Well, a partial bite would be where the dog did not get a full grip on the victim and therefore did not penetrate the skin. The teeth actually slide around along the surface of the skin in the attempt to get a grip.
Could you make that determination, that partial grip, as you've described it, from looking at the wound?
Yes.
And how, in this specific experience at the USC jail, did you determine, generally, that the dog had made a partial grip on whatever was the body part that was the subject of the wound?
Well, oftentimes because they were accompanied by completed dog bites that had full penetration, puncture wounds, and tearing.
Right, and so did you make the observation of the wound? In other words, you saw it and then reached a medical conclusion about whether it was partial or complete?
Yes.
And approximately how many times did you look at the wound and make a medical determination with regard to whether it was a partial or a complete grip by the dog?
I don't really know because we focused in on the most dangerous of the wounds, the ones that had the large gaping lacerations and that needed the medical attention.
So the predominance was the typical canine bite, but then there were also a less number with the incomplete bite, correct?
Yes.
Does an incomplete bite what you observed, have any relationship to a civilian dog bite?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
It wasn't a great question. So let's go to, does a canine bite ever present as a regular community dog bite in terms of the wound?
Ever?
Yes.
A trained canine bite?
Yes.
I haven't seen it.
Right. So an incomplete canine bite, correct, is more tethered to a canine. I'll rephrase. Describe how you would compare an incomplete canine dog bite to a civilian dog bite.
Well, that's difficult. And again, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay, well, let's just conclude this way. So the predominance at the LAUSC Jail Emergency Department was canine dog bites. Let me rephrase it. We'll in terms of LAUSC Jail Emergency Department, what was the predominant type of dog-inflicted wound that you observed and treated?
The regular emergency department?
Yes.
Not jail? The predominant was civilian dog bites.
Now let's move to the emergency department at LAUSC, and specifically your role as an emergency department physician. And as I understand it, you've testified that was between 1987 and about 2016 as an intern resident and physician. Is that your testimony?
And yes,
Now, did you treat and assess dog bites or dog wounds in that capacity in the emergency department of LACUSC?
in the main emergency department, yes.
In the main emergency department. And did you also treat, beyond dog-induced wounds, general animal-induced wounds that were not from a dog?
Yes.
Describe some of the animal wounds, non-dog animal wounds that you would observe and treat in the regular emergency department.
Well, the most common one was the cat. But beyond that, we would see wounds from skunks, rats, raccoons. I recall seeing an opossum wound one time, of course, snake bites and, various other animals.
Approximately how many dog bite wounds did you observe and treat in the emergency department at LACUSC?
So the main emergency department,
Yes.
well, over the course of all those years, at least 500.
How do you come up with the number 500?
Well, it was an estimate based on seeing, based on the number of years I worked, plus the number of weeks in a year, plus the number of dog bites that I saw per year. Per week. And that's how I came up with that number. And I underestimated.
Describe what you did, just briefly, with regard to the wounds. What type of practice of medicine, what did you do specifically with the wounds?
So when a patient came in with a wound.
And I'm talking dog bite wounds.
Okay, well, first I had to figure out if it was a dog bite. Because some patients couldn't tell us what kind of animal bit them. Most of the time they could, but some couldn't. Some were young, some, there were various reasons. There was sometimes language barriers. So I had to figure out what type of animal inflicted the wound. And there was a very important clinical reason for that.
We're going to get to that.
Okay.
So I think you testified earlier about specifically what you did with the wound. What did you do specifically with the dog, these 500, approximately more than 500 dog-inflicted wounds? What did you do specifically, so to speak, with your hands?
Okay. Well, I was clearly interested in wounds, and particularly bite wounds. I was very interested in this, so it got my attention all the time. And so what I first do, you know, I had to do a differential diagnosis, but physically, if I determined it was a dog bite wound, then I'd render the appropriate treatment. Sometimes there was perforation of the skin and lacerations, and those lacerations sometimes needed debridement, which is cutting away from, you know, the edges and the, you know, the dead tissue, any devitalized tissue. Some were large enough that they actually needed suturing. Many of them needed antibiotics prescribed.
In terms of the facility, I think you've testified that it was a level 1 trauma center.
Yes.
Did the fact that it was a level 1 trauma center have any effect on the number of dog bite wounds you would see?
I don't know the exact effect, but we did get referrals in.
And does the fact that it was a level trauma 1 center mean your estimate was conservative or liberal?
Oh, my estimate was conservative.
Meaning conservative, you say 500, but describe what you mean by conservative.
Conservative
Up or
means,
does it go down?
oh, I probably saw a lot more than 500.
Does that estimate include the number of dog-inflicted wounds that you supervised?
No.
So in addition to the 500 plus, you also supervised. Describe what the nature of the supervision was with respect to dog-inflicted wounds.
Well, as an attending physician at a university medical center, of course, I supervised interns, other residents, medical students, PAs, and nurse practitioners. And so frequently had, you know, 3 to 5 people working with me that I had to supervise. So I would see I saw any case that they saw. You know, any patient that they saw, I would supervise. And when there were wounds, I would look at the wounds personally myself.
How many trainees did you typically supervise per shift?
Typically 3 to 5.
So in addition to the 500 plus, you were supervising 3 to 5 trainees per shift who also were treating dog-inflicted wounds?
Yes.
And can you give an approximate number of dog-inflicted wounds, just approximate, that those trainees would be experiencing in their role?
It's so hard to give an estimate. But with all those trainees and all those weeks and years, I would say at least another 500.
Have you ever participated, now we're going to switch gears to when you described you were a forensic pathologist in OR. Did you ever have experience with an autopsy which regarded a canine attack?
Yes, unfortunately.
When?
It was in 1995.
And where?
It was in Los Angeles.
And where specifically, which department in Los Angeles?
Oh, when I was at the coroner's office, I was assigned an autopsy.
So this was at the medical examiner's office?
That's correct, medical examiner now.
And what was the subject of the autopsy? Who was the subject?
It was a young boy, I don't remember the exact age, and he was killed by 3 dogs when he entered into a fenced area.
Were they canine dogs or civilian dogs?
I don't know the exact training, but I was led to believe that they were not law enforcement canine dogs.
So you were led to believe there were civilian dogs? Not, they just weren't canine dogs.
They weren't, as far as I know, they were not trained canine dogs. They were civilian dogs.
Did you observe any wound patterns as part of that autopsy?
Yes,
Describe the wound patterns that you observed.
I'll never forget them. There were many deep lacerations, avulsions. There was a wide range of wounds, and amongst them there were patterns of abrasions, multiple parallel abrasions.
Were there any other types of marks from the part of the dog that you observed?
Oh, there were puncture wounds.
Any other types of wounds from any other part of the dog?
Well, I believe that there were some claw marks. They also would look like superficial abrasions.
And were there any bite marks?
Oh, yes.
How many? Approximately.
I don't know.
More
There
than
were-
one?
Oh, many.
Many. Now let's move to studies and publications. Have you ever performed a study of canine dog bite injuries?
Yes.
Describe it.
Yes. My colleagues and I performed a study of over 700 canine dog bites that presented to the jail emergency department over a 10-year period.
When approximately was this study?
In the in the 1990s.
Did that study result in any publications?
Yes, 2.
Were those 2 publications peer-reviewed?
Yes.
What does peer review mean?
That means that a group of physicians from the same specialty have read the article, analyzed the methodology, and determined that this was a valid study.
Have you, in addition to that study that was supposed to be peer-reviewed, have you ever edited any publications?
Yes.
Describe the publications that you edited.
I edited a 2-volume publication called Topics of Emergency Medicine, Forensic Emergency Medicine.
And were there any chapters in that regarding human bite wounds?
Yes.
Describe briefly what the chapter was about.
Yes, the chapter was written by Dr. Gerald Vale, who was a pioneer, and one of his colleagues, Dr. Anselmo, who were pioneers in the field of forensic odontology, bite wound analysis.
Now, you mentioned Dr. Gerald Vale. What is his profession or professions?
Okay, he was a dentist and a teaching dentist at the University of Southern California, and an attorney as well.
How was he? Are you aware of his reputation?
Oh yes,
How
even
was he
before I
regarded?
got to.
What was his reputation?
Sustain this.
What was his reputation?
No, we're
Okay.
going to move on to a different question. What do you remember the title of the publication?
Excuse me.
The title of the publication again?
Yes. It was called Topics of Emergency Medicine, Forensic Emergency Medicine.
Okay. What part of that publication did you edit specifically?
Myself and my co-editor edited the entire publication, every chapter in the publication.
Did that publication discuss human dentition?
Yes, the chapter written by Dr. Vale and colleague did.
Did that publication discuss dog dentition?
Yes.
And you, of course, since you edited the whole publication, you were editing, well, let me ask this. Did you edit parts of the publication on human and dog dentition?
Yes.
What did you do as an editor of those chapters?
Well, I read the chapters thoroughly, and looked looked for any inconsistencies or any problems with the topics, and then if and made some small change recommendations, and then it went on for publication.
Do you know why you were asked to edit that publication?
Yeah, that's sustained.
In terms of the publication after editing, was the publication peer reviewed?
Yes.
And were you part of that peer review process?
No, because I was the editor.
Correct. So you were the editor, and then after your editing, it went on for peer review?
Yes.
And then did it sort of pass, so to speak, the peer review?
Yes.
And then it became published?
Yes.
Let's now move on to the topic of publications, seminars, talks, lectures. How many peer-reviewed, well, let me start this way. Have you read any peer-reviewed published articles on dog-inflicted wounds?
Yes.
Can you describe how many?
Oh, at least 20.
Have you ever attended any seminars regarding wound identification and bite wounds?
Yes.
How many approximately? Or if you can't recall, describe some of the seminars.
I don't know the exact number of seminars. However, I would frequently attend them at the coroner's office, Los Angeles coroner's office, and at the American Academy of Forensic Sciences annual meeting.
And some people have varying reviews about what happens in a seminar. What happened at these seminars that you attended?
These are high-level seminars, very intense. And I was one of the few medical physicians that would actually attend the odontology seminars because it was a special interest of mine.
And what were some of the topics at these seminars that were discussed on odontology? Sorry, first let's talk about what is odontology?
I think it's the study of human dentition, or dentition in general, I believe. I don't know.
And so it can be, it's the study of, back to the seminars. Describe what occurred at these seminars.
Yes, at the LA Coroner's Office, there would be a lecture every year about, I should say about every year, regarding forensic odontology and bite wounds, bite wounds on humans. At the American Academy of Forensic Science, those were very interesting seminars in which the specific cases were discussed by the board-certified forensic odontologists, and principles of bite marks identification was discussed.
Did those seminars involve the topic of dog-inflicted wounds?
Not primarily.
Was there any discussion of dog-inflicted wounds at those seminars?
At some of the seminars, if dog-inflicted wounds were discussed, it was just in means of distinguishing, a human bite versus a dog bite.
You've mentioned Dr. Vale's name a couple of times. Did you ever work in any capacity with Dr. Vale?
Yes, he was the forensic odontologist for the Los Angeles County Coroner's Medical Examiner's Office.
Did you ever consult with or for him?
Yes.
Describe that.
Well, he had a case where there was, it was a dog bite case, and I don't know a lot of the details, but he called me up and wanted to discuss the case and specifically some features of dog bites and treatment.
And was he looking for information from you, or was he just reporting to you his views?
No, he was looking for information.
And what type of information did you provide generally?
You know, I can't really say.
But it
So
was
long
the
ago.
topic, again, the topic was?
Dog bites.
Yep. Let's now move on to a different topic. Do you have experience providing treatment to individuals involved in motor vehicle accidents?
Many, many hundreds.
Describe the many, many hundreds of experiences you have involving motor vehicle accidents.
Well, it's difficult because there were so many. I worked at a level 1 trauma center, which was right next to some major roads and major freeways. So vehicle accidents were very commonplace. But the victims would range from mildly injured to comatose and dead. A wide range, a lot of injuries, bodily injuries, head injuries, wide range of injuries. And that's pretty much it. And I know what I was going to say. Some of those victims were actually hit by a car. They weren't just motor vehicle collisions. They were actually struck by a car.
That's what I wanted to get to. So before we get to the specific of what you just mentioned, struck by a car, you've described today a variety of your roles from an EMT, police officer, etc. For each one, could you just tell whether or not getting into details, whether or not you observed and treated a human involved in a motor vehicle accident?
As an EMT, yes, I did. As an emergency physician, yes, I did. As a forensic pathologist, no, I didn't treat anybody, but I certainly examined them and took very detailed notes and made some assessments.
So as a forensic pathologist, because I'm assuming, well, as a forensic pathologist, describe a little bit more about what you mean.
Well, as a forensic, I should have clarified a little bit better. As a forensic pathologist in the coroner's office, all of those victims were deceased. However, in my role as a consultant forensic pathologist, I would consult on cases for the courts, for various parties in the courts on motor vehicle injured patients.
Now let's go to the emergency room. Can you approximate how many patients involved in a motor vehicle accident that you treated?
I can't. There were so many.
Is it in the
Hundreds
tens?
or thousands.
I'm sorry, repeat that, please.
I'm sorry, hundreds or to thousands.
And how do you come to that estimate?
I just again, if on a very conservative way, if I just very conservatively said I worked 1,000 weeks during my career, even if I saw one motor vehicle accident patients per week, I'm at 1,000. But certainly I saw a lot more than that.
Let's move on to the topic of wound patterns. How do you assess the source of wounds, generally?
Well, I look at the skin, and I try to recognize if there is a pattern that I've seen before, a pattern that I am familiar with, and sometimes in the past I had to compare a pattern to an object, for instance. But yes, wound recognition and pattern recognition are major interests of mine.
Is wound pattern recognition a topic that is taught in medical school?
In residency, for sure.
And what is taught in residency about wound pattern recognition generally?
Well, in emergency medicine residency, it's taught to recognize patterns and locations of wounds because the physician has to be able to recognize things like child abuse and elder abuse and domestic violence, which oftentimes are associated with specific patterns of injuries.
Is wound pattern recognition considered a standard of care, you used that term earlier today, in the medical profession, in the emergency department? Is that something is wound pattern recognition an area that an emergency room physician is trained in?
Yes.
And how frequently, in your experience as emergency room physician, do you exercise pattern wound recognition?
I can't tell.
Is it frequent or infrequent?
Oh, frequent.
Why is assessing the source of bite wounds, well, let me go backwards. Is assessing bite wounds important in the practice of medicine in the emergency department?
Is assessing the source of bite wounds?
Is it important?
Yes, it is very.
Why?
Well, because different types of bite wounds are treated differently.
Does the assessment affect the care and treatment that the patient is going to receive?
Yes.
How?
Okay. Well, certain bite wounds are prone to certain infections. So dog wounds are prone to certain infections, cat wounds, various other animals that inflict wounds cause infections. And the infections can differ from the inflicting animal. Additionally, so there are bacterial infections. There are also viral infections, such as rabies. So, for instance, some types of wounds from some type of animals will require a series of rabies shots because those animals are known to harbor rabies. So it's very important to try to figure out what the source of the wound is so you can determine, does the person just need some antibiotics and a tetanus shot, or do they need a series of rabies shots?
Are there circumstances in which you've had to identify the source of wounds without input from the patient?
Yes.
Describe those.
Well, there may be a language barrier, or sometimes with a child will have a bite, but we don't know what bit the child. So yes.
Are there any other circumstances, any other categories that you have to determine the source of the wound, say where you might have a legal responsibility to make a judgment on the source of the wound?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
In terms of circumstances where you have to determine the source of the wound, are there any other examples where you've determined the source of the wound, sort of categories of people, certain types of victims that you've seen and had to make an assessment?
Are you talking about bite wounds?
No, just a wound in general.
Well, yes. So
wound pattern is the topic. So
yes.
With regard to wound patterns.
Okay. Well, yes. So it's important for an emergency physician, for instance, to recognize patterns because sometimes the victims themselves will attempt to mislead the doctor. For instance, it's not uncommon for parents or I should say caretakers or domestic violence victims to give a different story in the emergency department than the true story of how an injury was sustained. And I'm a mandated reporter. Emergency physicians are mandated reporters. So we have to be on the lookout for certain injury patterns.
Are you familiar with the term posterior surface?
Yes.
And specifically with regard to a limb, upper body limb and arm, what is the posterior surface?
So the posterior surface is the back of the individual, and
Hold up your arm and demonstrate what you mean when you
yes.
say posterior.
But first, let me just
Sure.
explain that the anatomic labels are given to the human body, or have been given in the past to the human body, in reference to what they call the standard anatomical position, which is with the person standing upright and their arms down at their side. So anything in the front is called anterior, anything in the back is called posterior, which means that the posterior of the arm is actually here. Because even though it doesn't look like it might be a posterior to somebody, it's actually anatomically the posterior of the arm. So it's this surface right here. And so that's what is meant by the posterior of the arm.
What can, and have you observed wounds on the posterior surface of an arm in your career?
Oh, that's highly indicative of defense wounds.
What do you mean it's highly indicative of defense wounds?
Well, we're taught in both emergency medicine and forensic pathology that if there are wounds to that area of the arm, it may be because the person or victim sustaining the injuries was trying to protect themselves, and so they brought the arm up to protect their face, their head, their neck, chest area, and so the wounds to this area, the posterior of the arm, are often defensive wounds.
What is your experience with defensive wounds to the posterior location of the arm?
I have a lot of experience with it.
Describe that.
Well, both, again, in the emergency department, saw many victims, many patients, I should say, that had wounds to that area of the arm. And of course, in the medical examiner's office, again, so many victims that had wounds to that posterior surface of the arm.
Did you, as part of that examination for the posterior surface of the arm, ever determine the wound was from a stab wound?
Yes.
How many times roughly?
10, roughly.
Did you ever in your career determine that a posterior wound was sourced by a dog bite or dog claw wound?
Not that I labeled in the medical chart as such.
In your analysis, in your experience in the emergency room and in the jail with canine wounds, did you reach a conclusion with regard to whether a wound on the posterior surface of an arm was a defensive wound as you have defined it today?
In the emergency department, it didn't really matter if an animal bite was on the posterior surface of the arm, because in the emergency department we focused in on treatment. It did matter in cases of, like I said, domestic violence or child abuse, because those were assaults. But other than that, the wounds were treated as if they were on the front of the arm. No difference.
How about in the canine dog bite wound experience? Did you ever conclude that a wound from a canine bite or any kind of dog bite was a defensive wound?
Yes, some of them were, but again, it didn't matter in terms of the treatment. So, so that determination wasn't really important.
So you made a determination that they were, well, put it this way. Did you make any kind of an assessment, whether it affected treatment or not, that the wound was a defensive wound with regard to a dog bite?
Yes.
Now let's go on to characteristics of dog bites and scratch wounds. Do you know approximately how many dog bite wounds present to the emergency room in the United States on an annual basis?
Yes, it's over 300,000 estimated.
And how do you know that estimate?
From the medical literature.
And is that medical literature you have read and are aware of?
Yes.
Which medical specialty, do you know what I mean by medical specialty?
Yes.
Which medical specialty sees the most dog bite inflicted wounds?
Well, I believe it's the emergency physician because we're the, gatekeepers, so to speak.
Do you have a conclusion whether emergency room physicians have more exposure to and familiarity with dog bites than other specialists?
Objection.
Ask it differently.
Thank you. Do ER physicians have more exposure to and familiarity with dog bites than others?
Yeah, sustain for the same reason, but I'll give you a minute to think about how to ask it.
Thank you. Which medical specialty has the most exposure? Well, let me conclude it this way. In terms of the presentation of dog bite wounds in the emergency room, are emergency room physicians trained to recognize and treat dog-inflicted wounds on humans?
Yes. It's a common presentation in the emergency department.
Describe the difference between, well, do you know the difference between a civilian dog bite and a canine dog bite?
I believe I do.
Describe it.
Well, the canine dog bites inflicted by trained canine dogs tend to be quite devastating. Puncture wounds with tearing lacerations, very big wounds causing injury to muscle, connective tissue underneath, even blood vessels at times. They oftentimes require admission to the hospital and extensive intravenous antibiotics. As opposed to the canine, the civilian, what I call the civilian dog bites, which typically are just scratches or, I shouldn't say scratches, abrasions or small puncture wounds, and require maybe a little bit of irrigation and a tetanus shot and outpatient treatment.
Dr. Russell, you've been gracious and patient with my questions. Do you need a break for any reason, subject to the court's permission?
So I was going to go just a little bit further, if we could, like 15 minutes. But I can't see Dr. Russell from where I am. Dr. Russell,
I'm
can you
okay.
break?
I'm okay.
Can you go 15 more minutes?
I could.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Let's move on to the topic of dental features of dogs. Do you have knowledge of the dental features of dogs?
Yes.
Describe that knowledge.
Well, I have knowledge of the numbers and configuration of the teeth, the shape of the jaw.
And can you describe generally that knowledge?
Generally, yes. So the shape varies depending on the breed, but generally there are 42 teeth in the canine mouth, and a certain number on the top, a certain a certain number down below, 20 on top, 22 below.
And does that knowledge source from your medical education training, or does it source from the literature, or both?
Both.
Now let's go to an overview of dog-inflicted injuries. Specifically, can you give an overview of the specific type of dog-inflicted injuries on humans?
Yes, they could range from the very minor, which are abrasions and contusions or bruises, to very large gaping lacerations and amputations and avulsions and just about everything in between.
What do you mean by an avulsion?
An avulsion is where a piece of tissue is actually torn away. By tissue, generally I mean the skin, and it's torn away from where it's supposed to be. But yet, a little part of it may still be intact. So it's not completely amputated, it's just a portion of it is torn away.
Are there ever teeth from a dog that are the cause of those types of injuries you just described?
Yes.
Are the nails of a dog ever the source of the type of injuries you just described?
The nails are sources of abrasions.
Are the claw marks the source of any type of injury from a dog? Or are the claw marks of a dog the source of any type of the injuries you just described?
Yes, abrasions.
Let's go to the types of dog bite injuries. Describe the types of dog bite injuries with which you have professional experience.
Well, I have experience with that whole range of injuries and the unfortunate situation of death too.
So let's discuss the components of that range you just talked about. What types of injuries specifically from a dog do you have experience with regard to the type of dog injury from the dogs and the dog dentition?
I don't understand.
I'm sorry, my question is not clear enough for you. Are there words or names that are associated with the type of injury from a dog?
Other than the medical terms like abrasions and contusions, lacerations.
Is there a certain action of dog teeth that occurs that they have a name for the type of injury that they present?
Okay, so one type of injury can be what they call the tear and the puncture and tear and pull injury, where the canine teeth, which are the longest ones, and the dogs have 2 canines on the upper jaw and 2 on the lower. The canine teeth actually puncture the wound, and what happens, and which I haven't described yet, is that generally a person's not standing still while they're getting bitten. They're pulling, the dog is pulling, and what happens is a lot of these wounds are caused, especially the extensive ones, by the relative pulling away of the victim and the dog. Some dogs hold on and pull as well. So this pulling, the puncturing and then pulling will cause these hole and tear lacerations.
Now, you've discussed previously wound pattern recognition. You've used that term. How would you describe the wound pattern characteristics of dog-inflicted wounds on humans?
There are a number of different patterns.
In a spectrum of characteristic, from small to medium to high, what one of those 3 categories would you describe is appropriate for the characteristicness of recognizing a pattern from a dog?
Well, if there is a certain combination of wounds, a certain pattern of wounds, being parallel lines and puncture wounds, etc., if that is present, that combination, that is highly characteristic of a dog-inflicted injury.
So I just want to make sure we understand the type of dog-inflicted wounds that are, as you just called it, highly characteristic of a dog wound? What is the observation that leads you to conclude in certain instances that a wound is highly characteristic of a dog-induced wound?
Well, if I see a combination of punctures or incomplete punctures, as well as parallel abrasions, so striations, scratches would be the civilian word for that, that combination is highly characteristic.
Are you familiar with the term, with regard to dog bites and dog wounds, an incomplete dental impression?
Yes.
What does that term mean?
Well, dogs don't generally bite with their entire mouth when they are biting a human. They bite with the front of their mouth. So, so you get a partial dental imprint. Additionally, depending on the type of, the amount of force and the grip, so to speak, that the dog gets on the skin, there may or may not be a complete impact of the teeth.
So would it be, so when it's not a complete impact of the teeth, have you observed that incomplete impact of the teeth in wounds to humans from dogs?
Yes.
Describe those observations, including how frequently you've made those observations.
In general, they're more frequent in civilian dog bites because the civilian, well, I can't say why, but anyways, they're more frequent in civilian dog bites, the incompletes. And the pattern is as I just described.
Is your experience greater from your entire career with dog-inflicted wounds from canine bites or from civilian dogs, as you've used that term?
In terms of overall numbers, civilians.
Your Honor, I would be going on to my next topic, and if you would like me to continue, I can, or if Your Honor prefers a break, I can do that as well.
Oh, I don't need a break, but I understand if people want a break. But what I want to know is how long, I'm not rushing you, but just to figure out how long we're going on the direct.
My best estimate, Your Honor, is 40 to 45 minutes.
Okay, so you say this is a good place to stop?
I do, Your Honor.
Okay, then we'll stop. So
Thank you,
we'll take a
appreciate
20-minute break and be back out here at 11:30.
All rise for the court, please.
Oh,
Quiet, please. Court still in session. Quiet, please.
You are muted.
Ian? You say? I'll spend the next 6 hours venting everything from yesterday. Oh yeah. And I talked to Mary